Hello and welcome to Supporting Students Who Are Nonverbal. I'm Dana Vermelia, an educational consultant at Blast Intermediate Unit 17. In today's session, we're going to talk about what is communication, how people communicate, and ways to support our nonverbal communicators. Within that section, we'll touch on the prompt hierarchy as well. So when we think about communication, what is communication? Communication is defined by Merriam-Webster Dictionary as the act or process of using words, sounds, signs, or behavior to express or exchange information or to express thoughts, feelings, etc. to another. What stands out about that definition to you? Think about all the ways that you communicate in a day. We text, we speak, we write, we gesture, right? Did you notice the word behavior in there? Did you notice that gestures is a part of that definition? When we think about that definition, what do we see that that definition does not say? It does not say that communication is the exchange of verbal words, right? It says so much more than that. Even within the use of words, that could be written words, verbal words, or even words that are presented through augmentative and alternative communication. Actually, we typically use about 93% nonverbal communication when we're interacting with others. Let me say that again. Typically, approximately 93% of our communication is nonverbal. This can include body language, gestures, facial expressions, and all of those things. This can also include tone. And while some people say, oh, you shouldn't be the tone police, right? There are times we need to ignore the tone of an individual and focus on their message. But doesn't the tone often tell us so much about what somebody else is communicating to us? We're going to take a look at an example right now of a little bit of mystery.
Everything to your satisfaction, sir.
Did Mr. Bean tell us anything verbally?
Everything to your satisfaction, sir.
He didn't, right? But did he tell us anything non-verbal? So much. If you're familiar with Mr. Bean, you'll know that that is his primary means of communication. So what's different about my student? Well, your student might have a body that's different, right? They might have a body that's more involved and they don't have the control over all of their body parts like we do. You might have somebody who has less interest in communication that you're working with. You might have an individual who has different background knowledge and also different language development, or they might be at a different place in their language development. It's important to always presume competence, right? We know that our individuals who have very complex bodies doesn't mean that just because their body is complex, that doesn't mean that they can't learn, right? It also doesn't mean that they can't communicate. They just might not be able to communicate the same way that we typically do. So it's really important that we presume competence in their ability and that we give them the opportunity to learn and to show what they know. We need to give them different kinds of access so that they can communicate. So that brings us to what might communication look like for my student? Well, you might have somebody who's communicating through pointing, through taking you to something, facial expressions, eye gaze, behavior, such as crying or yelling, even hitting, anything like that. And somebody who's using augmentative and alternative communication, or we also call that AAC. It's important to keep in mind that typically behavior is some kind of communication. We need to spend time getting to know our students. This is because they may not always demonstrate typical nonverbal behaviors. For example, I know an individual who raises their hands up by their face or above their head to indicate they're done. I have also known several students who start laughing and get very wound up, maybe even running around, and one student who literally was like jumping on and off the tables, right? And it seemed like he was enjoying the activity that was being presented because he was excited, he was laughing, running around, jumping on the tables. But really, he was overstimulated. He didn't like what was happening, but he didn't know how to react to that. So our students don't always demonstrate the same reactions that correlate to how they're feeling. I knew that this student was smiling and laughing, but he wasn't actually liking what was happening. He was actually uncomfortable with the situation and what was going on, and he was overstimulated. But not everybody that worked with him knew that. So he would run around and do these things, and the staff that didn't realize that thought he was enjoying the activity, so sometimes would continue it instead of realizing that we needed to pivot. There are many different types of augmentative communication. So we can have low tech or no tech. That's things like sign language, picture cards, core vocabulary boards. We can have mid-tech devices, so they have voice output, but they don't have a lot of options. They're just kind of what you see usually. So that's like a Go Talk or a Prox Talker, even a Prox Pad, things like that. And then we have our high-tech devices, which are dynamic display voice output devices. So they might be apps on an iPad or dedicated devices that have different pages. If you touch a button, it might take you to another page. You can create novel and spontaneous utterances, and the vocabulary is much more extensive. When we're thinking about how we can build these communication skills for our students who are nonverbal, we need to make sure we're focusing on what is motivating. Not everything that we think is important is motivating to our students. For example, we might want a child to tell us they need to go to the bathroom, but if that student doesn't actually care whether they go to the bathroom or not, that's not motivating for them. So it's motivating for us sometimes, but not for them. That's not something we would necessarily focus on if that student doesn't have an interest in that. We also need to make sure we initially reinforce immediately. So for somebody who's not a great communicator, if they communicate something, we need to respond to it right away. We might, if they request something, we give it to them right away. If they greet you, we respond right away. If they make a comment, we respond right away. Any of those things. As their communication is increasing and they're becoming more effective communicators, that's where you might be able to say, oh, we'll talk about that in a minute, or we need to finish this and then we can do that, and those sorts of things. The more familiar you are with any type of system that a student's using will help you to demonstrate use. So that brings us to our next point, that we want to make sure we're providing examples and demonstrating use of any augmentative communication used. It's important that you become familiar with it. A lot of programs that are high tech do have word finding options. So if you aren't sure where something is, you can look and it can show you. But if the student will allow you to use their device and demonstrate with those examples, that's really important. You also need to make sure you're allowing many opportunities for communication. And you might have to set up that opportunity to communicate. It needs to be a prioritized item, right? We have to decide that we're going to prioritize communication because we want these students to increase their ability to communicate and be more successful. So we have to specifically set up those opportunities. How do we do that? Maybe we're doing a craft. I might bring all of my supplies in a box, right? And then I might be talking about like, oh, what do you think is in here? I wonder what we're doing today, right? And you might have somebody else who's part of this look and say, oh, that's really exciting. Or you might have somebody else ask you, what's in there, right? And then you can pull out one thing and tell them. And you keep doing that to see if the student will then ask what else, right? Or ask what's in there, or I want to see, or show me, any of those things. Along with that, you might give them some of the items you're using and have them, talk about, I wonder what we're doing with these things, right? So different things like that are different ways that you can set up those opportunities to communicate, talking about, even different placing things in different places. I put it on, I put it under, I put it behind, all of those sorts of things. Where did it go? Help you create opportunities. It's also really important to make sure you don't answer for a student. Give them time to think and formulate their response. We also want to make sure that we focus on high frequency words. So those high frequency words, when you can focus on the use of words that are typically very common in everyday use, we call those core vocabulary words. And they typically make up about 80% of what we say, all of us. Even if we're verbal communicators, what we communicate comes down to around 80% of it is comprised of only about 300 words, really. These are high frequency words. They're typically not nouns, right? It's a lot of action words, describing words, and things like that. Then the rest is called our fringe vocabulary words. They're less frequently used and they don't have as many versatile uses as the core words. They're often your nouns. So cookie is an example of a fringe word. But if a student tells me cookie, I might not realize what they're telling me. Did they tell me they want a cookie? Are they telling me they don't want a cookie? Are they telling me they made cookies or they ate cookies? Things like that. So when we're focusing on words like eat, want, make, those sorts of things are our core words that give us a lot more versatility in our messages. However, it's really important to balance both of those because sometimes we know that those fringe words are the most motivating, right? So if we focus on cookie, because that's my students' very favorite thing, we're going to use cookie, but then we're going to build from there. So what are you telling me about the cookie? I made a cookie, I ate a cookie, I dropped a cookie, all of those sorts of things. Sometimes people think that the students should only use AAC. So if our student is effectively communicating in an acceptable manner, we are going to accept that. Any person will always communicate in the quickest manner possible. If I can shake my head yes faster than I can say yes because maybe I'm doing something, that's quickest for me and you're going to accept that, right? If I can say a word instead of finding it on my device, I'm going to say the word. If I can point to the one thing I want and you can understand what I'm pointing to, that's effective communication and you're going to accept that. We want the student to use their AAC, that's for sure. But if they respond appropriately and you understand them, there's no reason to make them repeat themselves. That for sure can be frustrating to a student and discourage the use of any devices for them. If I already told you, you understood what I said, and now you're saying, well, now tell me with your device or tell me with your voice, that kind of thing. So we don't want to be doing that when we're interacting with the students. If a student isn't understood or communicating in an appropriate manner, then you're going to say, I need you to tell me a different way, right? If my student hit me because they didn't want to do something, we might model, tell me stop or different or don't want, those types of things, right? If they're yelling instead of just pointing, that's not effective in the fact of it's not appropriate communication, right? So we want them to be communicating in an appropriate manner that's understood. We're going to accept that. It's important to also realize that the use of augmentative and alternative communication does not prevent a student from talking. We will always, like I said, we will always communicate in the fastest method. The research supports that if we are augmenting communication and verbalizations do increase, you'll see the increase in verbalizations. Maybe the device use is really high because that's most effective, but as verbalizations increase, the use of the device starts to decrease. They kind of meet in the middle and then they continue, right? The verbalizations would increase and device use decrease. There are some students that never are fully effective communicators verbally and they will always use their device. There are some students that will always need a device in stressful situations because when they're put on demand, while they can speak, they can't speak during those situations. So it's really important to, again, know your student and know what's best for them. But if, for example, if I'm asked a yes no question and I can just shake my head yes and you understand my answer, I don't necessarily have to tell you yes on my device. Now, if you are far away from me and you can't see that I'm shaking my head yes, I might need to then tell you with my device. When we think about prompting for our students, it's really important to not just start and ask the question and then immediately give them a response. The first thing you want to do, and this is more of a prompt hierarchy for use with AAC, you want to give that expectant pause. So it's really important to just provide wait time and do nothing. Ask your question and do nothing. Then you might have an indirect nonverbal prompt. So that's your shrug, a hand motion, an expectant look. You might look toward the device because you want them to use it, or picture cards, or anything like that. But you're giving a nonverbal prompt. And remember, if we say, give me the cards, and then you hold your hand out, that is a prompt. So first, don't hold your hand out and wait, okay? Then you move from your nonverbal prompt, maybe like putting your hand out, to your indirect verbal prompt. So you might say something like, what's next? Or now what? Or what did you want? Right? Your indirect verbal prompt. Then you request a response. You tell me. Your turn. Those are examples of your requesting response. Along with these things, sometimes the first thing that it's great to do is just to restate your question. So give the pause time. You didn't get a response. Say what you said before in the exact same manner, because if I'm still processing and you say the same thing the same way that you first said it, I might be able to pick up and finish processing. But if you say it in a different way, I have to restart that process all over again. So if it's just a matter of I need a little more time to finish processing what you said before I can move forward, just restating the same way and then having another pause can be very helpful. If you've gone through your pause, your nonverbal prompt, then your indirect verbal prompt, and you're requesting a response, you might do some gestural cues. So you might point to the symbol on the student's device or tap it. Then you can move into your partial verbal prompt. So you might start the sentence, I want, or yesterday I, and you can do that verbally, but also with the student's device sometimes. And then we move to the direct model. So that's where we give them the answer if we know what it is, right? If we know, or if we aren't sure and it's a choice type of opportunity, you might model both, right? You might say, I want to go outside or I want to go for a walk. And model both options if you're not sure what it is that's the actual answer. There are tools also that you can use when you're prompting. So where it said gestural cues about tapping or pointing the symbol, or the picture card, things like that. Also, sometimes students make out really well if you use like a laser pointer to shine on something like that, because the light draws their attention, or I've used small, tiny flashlights or finger lights to do that before as well. Just different things like that, again, help draw attention and might make the student more likely to touch or tap that icon or item. It's also really important to remember that some students make out really well with models, but others don't. And sometimes students become prompt dependent, right? So we want to prompt as little as possible because we don't want to create that prompt dependency. We see that time and time again, that students become prompt dependent and we aren't able to fade that prompt or fully fade it. Have you ever worked with an individual that wants to grab your hand and go to touch something that they're doing because they're used to you touching their hand and doing it? So that's another thing. If you are prompting with a tactile prompt, it's important that you're doing hand under hand. So your hand is coming under their hand. So they're seeing their own hand doing the work. In a hopes that you can limit that prompt dependency as much as you can, but you really want to avoid that tactile, like hand over hand, hand under hand as much as possible, because again, we see students all the time taking your hand to the item or the icon or whatever it might be because they don't want to do it themselves. They're used to having you do that with them. Our goal is to make independent, effective communicators, so we want to limit that as much as we can. It's really important that we make communication fun. We need to think about ways that we can encourage communication. I already told you some of them. I told you how you can hide things in a box, right? And have them asking what's in there, or you can have them, pull out a few things and have them guessing what's next. You might want to play I Spy. We use motivating tools. So, depending on the age of the student, sometimes younger individuals, enjoy playing with cars and rolling them. So, maybe we're rolling it, and before it falls off the table, they're going to tell us stop, right? And otherwise, it's going to crash, or they might tell you when to make it go. Those are motivating things. I find the prepositions are quite motivating. We can talk about the monkeys jumping on the bed and falling off the bed, right? So we can do on and off and in and out, under and above, all of those, with sometimes with fun activities. But you have to start with what's motivating for the student. And it's not just requesting. We need to really go beyond requesting. What are we commenting about? What are we describing? Are we asking and answering? More than just getting my most favorite things. Now, it's also important to realize that some of our individuals, especially those with autism, really sometimes don't care about communicating unless it's to get what I want when I want it. So, again, you have to really use those activities that those students enjoy to expand that communication beyond just requesting the very basic things and participating in activities. It's also important to note that when we're doing these things, there's a little bit of a difference between communication and participation sometimes. We might want our students participating in our morning routine. Maybe you're doing calendar time or some kind of circle time. And talking about what's today, what's the weather, all of those sorts of things. And you might have the student participate in those, but that might not be super motivating for them. For some students, it is because they want to be a part of the group. But for others, that's a participation activity. And it's okay. And it's important to do participation activities. But it's also really important to make sure that you are including those times for communication, what I want to say. It's also really important that we don't assume we know what the student wants to say. So even if we're doing picture cards, we want to give them an out, right? So if I give you two choices, maybe I want to say neither of those. A great example is snack. Do you want pretzels or Cheez-Its for snack? I might not want pretzels or Cheez-Its. I can say neither, and I don't get a snack then, but I have the right to say I don't want a snack, right? Maybe you don't have something that I do like, and that's okay. But giving them that option to say something different or oops, not here, right? This isn't what I wanted to say is also really important as a communication measure, because sometimes we get locked into giving choices and a student will just choose when they don't really want either thing. Now, sometimes again, if it's a participation type activity, they might have to choose, right? These are the things we're going to do. Do you want to do your reading book first or your math first? And make a choice, or I can choose for you. And that's okay too. But giving those opportunities where it is meaningful and allowing the option to say neither or something different is really important to allow that communication. Our nonverbal communicators can always be challenging, but it is really important to remember that behavior is often communication. That student might not know what they want for sure. But if we're having behaviors, there's usually a reason. It might be because I'm overstimulated. It might be because I don't like what I'm being asked to do, but there's typically a reason. So keeping that in mind and providing the words and opportunities in different ways, whether it's through a sign or a picture card or a device. I've had individuals that wore bracelets. The staff can sometimes wear bracelets, or the students can, with a few icons only for those like really difficult times. So I can just touch one or pull it off a Velcro bracelet. Some individuals have like a key ring with some key components on it to help in those situations. Assigning a task sometimes for transitioning when that's difficult. So maybe I'm taking the icon for the gym because that's what's next on my schedule, and I'm putting it in the pocket outside the door of the gym. That gives me a task to get there. It helps me know where I'm going, and it's a piece of my scheduling that can help with those transitions sometimes for behavior. But making it fun, right? And not just saying, nope, it's time, you have to go do this. Add a task and find ways to motivate the students is really important. We didn't have a lot of time for the session, so that was just the tip of the iceberg on supporting students who are nonverbal. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. If I can be a support or answer questions for you, there is my email address. I will also provide some other resources that you can reference. There's an AAC bootcamp kind of tips for AAC users and the prompt hierarchy if you want to take a better look at that. So please feel free to review those as well. And think about, again, that opportunity that you're providing for your students and whether you're providing enough opportunities to build that communication. I will once again caution you to make sure you're not answering for your student. If somebody's asking them a question, don't answer, let them answer, right? And you might be the person that helps prompt them if they're not answering in a timely fashion because you might know the answer. One of my favorite examples is, where did you go on your field trip last week? Typically, if I ask a question like that, I know the answer, but maybe I don't. So you might need to support the student in answering if they don't get that far, but give them the time to think about it and to answer independently before you answer for them. So making sure you're giving that optimal pause time. You're not just automatically answering or automatically going to giving the answer, and you're building those opportunities for communication all day throughout the day as often as you can will be what helps you see the most success for increasing communication and support for those students who are nonverbal. Have a great day.